Hi gang! So in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of my makeup purchase regrets, and I'm going to specifically be focusing on eyeshadow palettes because that's the thing that I am most interested in terms of makeup, and I have invested more in eyeshadow palettes than any other product. I will also be talking a bit about some declutter uncertainties. But yeah, let's just get started with the purchase regrets. So my first eyeshadow palette purchase regret is the Too Faced Natural Love eyeshadow palette. And when I first saw this, I immediately fell in love with it. It looked so beautiful. I loved the packaging. I liked that there were so many colors. Looking at it now, I still think it's really pretty to look at. But when I got it and I started playing around with it, I found that a lot of the shades were a little bit too just bland for me personally. I found that a lot of the lighter shades didn't give me enough depth, and I just kept coming up with the same looks. I wasn't really feeling like I was getting a very diverse palette. I think if you have a very fair skin tone and you like very neutral looks, natural looks, it might be for you. But for me, it just didn't work out as well. Okay, so the next one is the Natural Lust palette from Too Faced. So when they released this, I saw swatches online and I thought, maybe this would be better for me because they're a little bit more deeper shades. And I was just hoping and hoping that I would like this palette better. I did. I liked it better than Natural Love, but I didn't like it enough to keep it. It is, again, like I say, the packaging is beautiful. I love the packaging, but I don't want to keep something just because the packaging is gorgeous. There's a peacock in there. I mean, yeah, if I could have kept anything just for the packaging, it would be this. But based on the looks that I got, I did like the looks that I got, but it just wasn't unique enough for me to keep it. Okay. Next up, we have the Urban Decay Naked Palette. I actually heard that it was discontinued a while back, and then I thought they brought it back, but apparently not. They haven't brought it back. So this original Naked Palette, I heard lots of good things about it. Later on, I got more interested in higher end palettes, and this was my first Naked palette. And I did some looks with it and I was like, it's okay. I mean, it's not fantastic. Over time, I kind of just learned that I'm more drawn to colorful eyeshadow palettes. Not necessarily full out rainbow palettes, but something that has interesting shades here and there. And I know I love shimmer shades. I know I love really foiled eyeshadow shades. And I know I like really dark greens, dark blues, dark reds, that kind of stuff. So yeah, things like the Naked palette just don't really excite me that much. Here we have the Naked 3. I also really thought this was very pretty, looking at the swatches, looking at the promo pictures and everything. And when I got it, this is cool. I like pinks. I do like a little bit of pink shimmer here and there. But the palette wasn't diverse enough for me. I didn't feel like I could get anything very diverse. If I put the very light shadows on my eye, I probably wouldn't look like I was wearing any makeup. And I guess that's the whole point. It's the Naked line. They want it to be very natural and neutral looking, but leaning towards a certain color family perhaps. But overall, yeah, after this, I was like, no more. I'm not buying any more Urban Decay Naked palettes. This is just not, this doesn't work for me. Next up, we have the Beaute Flair palette. Now, this is a beautiful color scheme. It is beautiful. I love the color scheme. I love the dark green, the dark blue, the purpley pink, the deep purpley pink, the shimmers in there, the biscotti shade looks so interesting. Everything about this palette is beautiful. Unfortunately, I don't like the formula from Ace Beaute. And that is the only reason why I decluttered it. Because if it had not been for the formula not working out for me, I would have definitely felt that this was one of like my favorite palettes, because the color scheme is so beautiful, the packaging is so beautiful. They just don't perform well on me. And I've heard this kind of complaint here and there. Some people say that they've had similar experiences of the shades not blending well, or the shades kind of changing color on their eyelids. And yeah, I felt like that was the case for me. Every time I went to put on a shade, it went on very pigmented looking, but it would kind of fade and I just wouldn't get the same effect anymore. Yeah, I don't know. It's like kind of like the Subculture palette. I'm not sure. It just the shadows didn't perform well for me. The matte eyeshadows just weren't for me. I know there are some people that actually do like the Ace Beaute eyeshadow formula, but not me. I don't like it. I did buy a few of their palettes and it kind of just was the same across the board. So that brings me to the next palette, which is the Ace Beaute Classical Paradise palette. And again, I love the color scheme. I think it's very cool, very unique. And honestly, Ace Beaute and Milk Cosmetics are up there as my top brands with the most interesting color stories. I really love the color story. It is so cool. I love that red. I love that olivey lighter green. And the shimmers look so cool. I think they look like they would really complement each other very well. I love the aesthetic of the packaging, but again, I don't like the formula. Unfortunately for me, the formula doesn't work. I will say that the Milk Cosmetics palettes, the color stories are also really great, and I do really enjoy their matte formula specifically. The shimmer formula, not as much. Some palettes have good shimmers and some palettes have really, really bad shimmers in them. I would just love Ace Beaute to change their formula to something that performs much better than what they have. Okay, the next one is the Ace Beaute Fallen Paradise palette. And this is a purple palette. Again, they've hit it on the head with the color story. I think those shades look so great together. That gray, that deep purple blue shade. I love it. I just love the color story, but not the performance of the eyeshadows. So next up is the OPV Beauty Rainbow Splash palette. At a certain point of time, I kind of got really into rainbow themed palettes, and this one seemed to be another one that people were talking about, and I didn't like it. I think there was one shade in there that was really cool, which is the shade Chimera. But apart from that shade, maybe Phantom I was down with. But yeah, apart from those two shades, I wasn't that wowed by the quality of this palette. Some of the more colorful matte shades just weren't performing well on my eye. They were very difficult to blend. And yeah, I just didn't get along with it. Also, I really don't like the packaging of it. I think it's quite kitschy and a bit tacky. Just not my style. I guess the color story intrigued me because that's why I got it in the first place. But now that I look at it again, it is kind of messy and all over the place. I think I just got sucked in by the hype of it from some of the more kind of like focused on indie brand YouTube channels. So yeah, I thought this was a really bad palette in my opinion. I didn't like the way it performed at all. I haven't tried any other OPV Beauty palettes, so maybe this was just one of the duds. The next palette that is a purchase regret is the Jeffree Star Jawbreaker palette. And There's really nothing wrong with this palette. It's very colorful. I do like the formula of the palette, and I was impressed by the performance, by the shades. It's just that I wasn't going to use those shades. I know I say I like color, but I kind of like the darker version of the colors instead of like the mid-tone. Well, mid-tone, yeah, but like the more pastel-y kind of colors, I don't gravitate towards a lot. And if I do feel like I'm in a pastel mood, I do have a palette from Sigma. This is the Creme de Couture. And for the amount of times that I actually feel like doing a pastel look, this is enough for me. I don't need another palette which does the same thing. This is just enough for me. Also, I have the Vizia Editorial Brights palette, and that one, they have a matte white shade. You can use, you can dip into the very pigmented, bright red and green and everything, and mix it with the white in order to make it more pastel. So that's another option, and that's another way I could go. So for the most part, the Jawbreaker palette is not something that I actually need. Okay, next is a much more toned down palette, and this is the Laura Geller The Delectables palette. Honestly, there's nothing wrong with this palette. The colors are really cool. I do like the tones. I did like the looks that I could get with it, but they just weren't strong or pigmented enough for me. And for someone who enjoys more of like just a wash of color, a hint of color, something to be very, go to the office, very professional, very minimal, this palette would be great. There's nothing wrong with the formula. It's a good palette. It's just that it's not pigmented enough for me, and yeah. But I did like the two green shades, and I did like the kind of orangey red shade and the bronze orange shade. Those shades were really nice. Moving on. This one is the Lime Crime Venus XL2 palette. And I will say that the color story is very unique. And when I look at it, it's so inspiring looking. But in a practical sense, when I use this palette, there's not enough depth in the shades. There's one dark brown matte shade, and that just doesn't cut it for me. Everything else is kind of shimmery, kind of mid-tone to light. And I do like the matte pink in there. I do like the matte mid-tone minty green shade in there. I really like the concept of it all. The shadows do perform nicely. I will say some of the more, glittery shades are a bit flaky. For the most part, the quality is good. The color scheme is interesting, but I want more depth in the palette. And because there's so many shades, I thought it was a missed opportunity for them not to have added at least 2 more darker shades. At least. I could have done away with Forbidden or Stella and just swapped those in for a deep purple or something. I don't know. I still have this palette technically because I depotted it again. And let me show you my Franken palette. My Franken Lime Crime Venus XL2. This is my Franken palette. This is what I created. Hold on. So as you can see, I did add some shades that do not actually belong there. And yeah. Okay, next up we have the Anastasia Beverly Hills Subculture palette. Love the color story. Love, 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 love. Love the color story. Very interesting. And this is actually when I started really getting into those deep, rich, saturated, colorful shades. Like the deep dark purple, the deep dark teal, and that pigmented darkened red, and that, yeah. So love the color story. Performance wise, I don't know what happened. They wouldn't blend on my eye. They just wouldn't blend. And they changed color on my eye. That was the most annoying thing. It kept changing colors on my eye. And I can't remember which shade it was, but it looked like it would be really pigmented. But when I put it on my eye, it kind of blended away into nothing. I do have a dupe of this particular palette in the form of single eyeshadow pans, and I do like to create looks with that color scheme still, but just not with the Subculture. Next up, we have the Anastasia Beverly Hills Alyssa Edwards palette. And honestly, there's really nothing wrong with the palette. The color scheme is interesting. The shadows performed well, at least from what I can remember. But yeah, the interesting shades in here are not shades that I would actually use. That very, very neon yellow, I don't particularly use a lot. The pink is okay. That really, really intense blue shade is also something that I don't use a lot. Somehow I feel like these kinds of blues, this specific tone of blue, just doesn't suit my skin tone. That purple is okay, but it's very Barney-ish. That shade, nah. And the shimmers are really pretty, but I also have those shades in other palettes. So this is just not something that I need at all. I really shouldn't have bought this in the first place, but I decluttered it. So there we go. Okay, next up we have the Morphe 35i Icy Fantasy palette. This was somewhat of a collaboration between Pony Syndrome, who is a Korean beauty YouTuber and artist and personality, I guess. And when I was in Newcastle, I saw it in the store and I thought it looked really cool. I was quite drawn to the shimmers, and I was also in a holiday mood, so I thought, you know what? It's here. If I get Morphe in Germany, I will have to buy it online. I can't go into a store and get it. And since I was at the Morphe store and it was right there in front of me, I thought, why not? It looks cool. It looks pretty. I'm on holiday, so let's get it. But it really isn't a palette that I needed. The 35 palettes from Morphe, they have the tendency to intrigue me. Some of them, not all of them. But I just never end up keeping them because it might be the formula, might be the just sheer amount of shades in one palette. I do have a couple of palettes that I built myself, which are 35 pan as well, I think. 35. But these are shades that I pick out. And so I know that I love these shades already. And I arrange them in a manner that makes sense to me. So yeah, there we go. But yeah, this palette just didn't work out for me. I ended up always kind of going only to the same kind of shades. Didn't work out for me. Just didn't work out for me. So moving on. The next one is the 35F palette from Morphe. And this is the Fall Into Frost palette. Again, looking at the picture here, the shades look beautiful and stunning, but not enough diversity in one palette. Most of the tones are kind of mid-tone to deeper mid-tone, and in that sense, it just doesn't give me enough range for what I want in a huge palette. So, like if I have a 35 pan palette, I want to be able to create a whole look with it without much fuss, right? It's a big palette. I don't want to have to grab another palette to do a full look. If I was fine with that shimmer shade and a dark black on the outer corners, I would be good. But I'm not. I can see this working for mid-tone to deeper skin tone people very well as a kind of neutral eyeshadow palette. I just didn't get enough diversity with this particular palette for me to justify keeping it. Next up, we have the 35M. This is the Boss Mood palette. And I believe I did keep a couple of the shades. I depotted this palette, kept a couple of the shades. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really wrong with the palette. It's just that the shimmery shades, I don't know, they were very chunky and flaky and just big pieces flaking. I don't know. I just didn't like the formula of the shimmers. But I did keep some of, I think I kept a couple of shades from this palette that I really liked. I can't remember what they are, but I know I did. Okay. Yeah. Okay, the next one is the Certifeye. If I'm not mistaken, this is the Dynasty palette. But this particular palette, what I regret doing to this palette was depotting it. Because the packaging is actually pretty cool. I like the concept of that kind of like easel flip instead of like a horizontal flip. It was like a you know, vertical flip. Yeah, I regret depotting it. I ended up giving a lot of the shades to my mom. It's not a bad palette. Some of the shades were really cool. Especially the deep matte shades were really cool. But I guess the quality of the eyeshadows just didn't wow me as much as I thought it would. It's really not a bad palette. I just shouldn't have depotted everything. Next one is the Modern Renaissance palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills. So again, this is when I started getting into higher end makeup and I was interested in trying kind of like the cult classics. To be fair, I'm glad I don't have this in my collection now, but I'm glad that I actually did try it. Just to get to know the formula of ABH. I do like the color scheme. It's interesting. This was one of my more expensive, colorful palettes. By today's standard, it's not very colorful. Yeah, today I feel like I have a lot of these shades in my collection. I can dupe this palette a few times with the different eyeshadows that I have, and that's why I'm glad I don't actually have it now. But it was cool to have tried out this palette for the formula when I did. Next up is the Jaclyn Hill 35 Pan Morphe palette. This was the first one. And I did keep some shades from this palette. I do think some of the shades were actually worth keeping. But a lot of the kind of like neutral matte shades I didn't really need. Honestly, the shimmers in this palette aren't that fantastic. But that dark green shimmer is quite unique. So that is one of the shades that I did keep. And the dark green beside it, I also kept. Yeah, I don't know. I'm also kind of glad to have tried out this palette. Again, I don't need it in its original form. And I also don't need all of the shades that are in this palette. A lot of the top 3 rows of this palette I could do without. I can see why people like it so much. It is a good palette to travel with because there's a lot of range of what you can do for the most part. Okay, next one is kind of the I kind of like it and I kind of don't. And this one I didn't actually declutter. I still have it. This is the Jeffree Star Cosmetics Blue Blood palette. I like the color scheme of this, but I suppose that there are just too many shades that I would never use. So I would say Mint Tea, I'm Cold, the very pastel blue and green, I just don't use. The shade Blue Blood, I also just don't use because I don't know, somehow that particular shade just looks really bad on my skin tone. It doesn't complement me at all. I think, you know, sometimes there are just some shades that just won't complement your skin tone, and that particular shade doesn't do it for me. The rest of the shades, okay. The shade Blue Monday was a little bit hard to blend. And the rest of the shades are okay. I mean, nothing in this palette really stood out for me as a must-have shade or a particularly interesting shade that I don't have in the rest of my collection. And that's why I don't really like this palette as much. But the thing is, I already depotted the Blue Black palette. Plus, I also removed the Blue Blood white wording on the top of it. I just don't really like Jeffree Star's design choice in terms of fonts. And I'm very, very particular about these kind of things. So I like to mess around and take apart my palettes. That's just something that I enjoy doing. Of course, a lot of people don't do what I do and leave their palettes intact most of the time. But with Jeffree Star packaging, I find it's very, very bulky, and I don't like that about it. So yeah, I depotted all the eyeshadow shades. Minty was the shade that broke, and the rest of them were kind of okay. And I still have them in my collection, and I still do use them from time to time. But yeah, Next palette is the Blood Sugar palette from Jeffree Star Cosmetics again. And I do like this palette. I do like the color scheme. And I do like the way that most of the eyeshadows perform. I will say that I really like Jeffree Star's matte eyeshadow formula. I think they blend very well. Except for the shade Prick. That one is a bit dry and a bit, yeah, I don't know. Don't really like the way that one performs. But for the most part, everything else is fine. It's just that this palette seems quite, I don't know, one tone for me. So I never really use this palette exclusively by itself. I will always pair it with something else. Conceptually, I feel like I should be able to be very creative with this palette, but I'm just not. I seem to get the same kind of looks over and over and over again using the same shades. Like I said, I do really like the matte shades. For instance, some of these shades are from that palette, I believe. And from other Jeffree Star palettes, this is just my collection of more neutral flesh tone shades for my skin tone. And I use these as blending shades all the time when I do my eyeshadow looks. So yeah, I do like the Jeffree Star mattes. I just end up having to depot them and put them in separate magnetic palettes. The one palette that I did like was the Alien palette, but again, had to depot it because that alien head was just ridiculous. Moving on. Okay, so this is the Nabla Dreamy 2 palette, and this is the look that I have on my eyes. That is to say, I haven't actually decluttered it. I still have it with me. And I've been playing around with this a little bit more because I knew I was going to do this video about purchase regrets. And I can say that now that I played with it again and like dipped my toe, and revisited it, I actually do find it more interesting. I don't know. I think when I first saw this palette, I thought that's going to be probably one of my favorite palettes, because I love the color story. I love the shimmers. But when I got it, I wasn't as in love with it as I thought I was going to be. Yeah, it just wasn't as crazy wonderful as I expected. I don't know. Maybe I just have really high expectations for Nabla, because they do make some of my favorite eyeshadows. For example, the shade Blue Velvet is my favorite dark blue matte ever. It blends like a dream. It is beautiful. I love their, I don't even know what you call that formula, but it's Water Dream has that kind of formula. Virgin Island has that formula. Selfish has that formula. They're just amazing and spectacular. So whenever I look at like another palette, I see the swatches, I like the colors, I just imagine it is going to be the best thing ever. But I've been playing around with this palette again, and I will say that I'm a bit more impressed than I was initially when I first used it. The formulas are just a little bit more interesting than your regular eyeshadow shimmer formulas. I think it's just that you have to know how to use them. For instance, this REM shade. So when I touch it, it's very, very dry. It doesn't feel oily at all. And I just expected it to feel like the Norvina shimmer shades, like this one. I just expected it to feel like really soft and oily. But no, it does not feel like that. That's probably because it just has a different formula and it still applies really beautifully. It has this gorgeous iridescence to it. There's a lot more glitter in this, I think. And I just have to kind of use it with a different base or pack it on with a finger. It's just a different application technique that I have to use to get that gorgeous look. If I just use like a brush like this with no spray on it and I go into that REM shade, I'm just going to get straight up silver glitter on my eye and there won't be any sort of purple base to it at all. So as you can see, that's the shade that I have on my eye right now. And it's beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. I think I really need to play around with this more. I will say though that I am a little bit disappointed at how this shade I thought was going to be a lot more deep and rich, but it isn't. It seems very, very basic, kind of brownish on my eye. I still do like this palette. I do like the formulas. The shade Libertine is absolutely gorgeous. Can you see that on the bottom lash line? That is beautiful. The shimmer shades are very beautiful. Yeah, I think I might have to pair this with some other deep shades if I want to diversify the look a little bit more. Because in terms of the matte shades for the outer corner, which is usually what I prefer to do, I'm pretty much going to get the same kind of outer corner vibe all the time because yeah, they're just very red tones, very reddish brown tones, all of these three matte shades, quite reddish brown. So, and I think these two matte shades over here have the formula of Natasha Denona creamy powder formula, which I was complaining about the other day. I felt that it was more of like a stain. Again, like I say, it's not bad if you just know how to work with it or learn how to work with it. But I just suppose that I'm not very used to this kind of formula and it throws me a little bit. Okay, let me just show you what I mean. Let me try to grab. I'm gonna take this shade right here. I'm gonna put it on the brush and I'm gonna blend it into my hand. It's got lots of stuff on it. You see? I don't know how much you can see, but it feels more like a stain. And that's probably why they call it creamy powder. There's something, I don't know, creamy about it, and therefore it's more of a stain than anything else. I mean, you can get the color on it. It's not like it doesn't show up, but it feels very much like a stain. I'm trying to use kind of the same type of brushes, but I don't have multiples of the same brush. So let me go into this shade from the Nabla. I'm going to do the same thing. And again, it's kind of more of like a stain. I'm not sure. Yeah. It's the formula. There's something about the formula that makes it more of a stain. And if I pick up a single, let's go with my let's go with this. This is my favorite dark matte blue shade from Nabla as well. It is the shade Blue Velvet, as I said. And this one is powdery, right? And let me just put it in the middle of these two. And it blends. I don't know how well this is translating on camera, but it's definitely not a stain. I don't know. I don't know how to say this other than I like it better. I like the way it blends better than these. But yeah, I guess as long as it shows up on the eye, I shouldn't complain too much. I don't know. I guess we all have like the different formulas that we prefer to work with. Just sometimes we're very used to using a specific technique and we're just set in our ways. Maybe that's why. I don't know. But yeah, that was a little mini rant about the formula of eyeshadows. Maybe there are benefits to using this particular formula for dark matte shades that I don't know about. Maybe it's more cost effective, or maybe it's easier to layer. I don't know. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so that's it. I hope this was a little bit interesting, maybe a little bit informative. I don't know. Let me know if you have decluttered some of these palettes, have some of these palettes, disagree with some of my points. Yeah, I'd like to hear what you have to say. And that's it for me. So ciao for now.